The best leaders are always available to their teams because being instantly reachable shows commitment and keeps things moving. That is absolutely not true, and I'm going to talk you through why that is. Hello and welcome to Engage and Thrive, also known as EAT, your coffee catch-up with me, your host, Taelon, where we will go through common problems and hurdles that come up in business, marketing and advertising and try and demystify them. I know firsthand how complicated and confusing it can seem with all the different acronyms and all the things to do in business. So let me try and help you be better in business. First things first, let's start with grabbing a coffee. To myth bust this, as someone who has easily fallen into this trap, I'm going to tell you from experience, when you become a leader, a director, a manager, whatever it is, it's almost like you have this reaction that you need to be instantly available or be able to provide feedback to your team so you can manage better, because if you're providing feedback sooner, they can get on with doing their work. And then if you're a business owner, I feel like this gets worse because you have this knee-jerk reaction to think, I have to be available all the time because if something goes wrong, it's all my fault because I own the business. And actually, you become so available to everyone else, you're not available to yourself. So in terms of your workload, your tasks, your personal life, and even your mental health. So to myth bust that misconception, being always on isn't about your commitment. It actually can show poor boundaries because it ends up that you get really distracted by other people's tasks and other people's workload, and you don't have an opportunity to take a step back, focus, and decide on priorities. And so what ends up happening is that you get so burnt out from being available to other people. As always, let's go through vocab. The first one being delegation. This is assigning responsibility and decision making to other people. I actually have another episode around delegation, which I will link in the show notes. Time blocking, scheduling specific chunks of time for focus work or availability. Context switching, the productivity drain from switching tasks too frequently. Decision fatigue, a decline in decision quality after prolonged decision making. So if you're thinking about signing off lots of work all at the same time. Notification overwhelm, reduced focus from constant alerts and pings. I'm sure we've all been there with social media notifications. Buffer time, scheduling gaps between tasks to review or approve work. This may be hours of buffer or this may be days of buffer. Boundaries, the limits set to protect time, energy and focus. Number one, the hidden cost of being always on. So you might think to yourself, there isn't a cost associated by always being available for my team. And like I obviously mentioned in the myth bust, this can impact your own workload and your mental health. And so as a suggestion, if you believe you're not being impacted, but you still have a never-ending to-do list and you don't know where the time hogs are happening, use a time tracking tool just to see what's happening throughout your day. And this is also a good way to understand your context switching. So how many times you stop that tracker and start it again to start another task. And I mean, try and do this if you are focusing on a piece of work, obviously have your time tracker running. And then if you get a message and you stop to read that message or respond to that message, stop your time tracker, start it again. And it may surprise you how many times you're starting and stopping that time tracker, which is exactly the thought of being always on or having that distraction because you don't have those boundaries in place. But if we're thinking about that misconception of being always on or always available for your team, that can actually set unrealistic expectations in terms of feedback, of when they're going to get feedback, in terms of the value or respect of your time, because they know they can just ping you whenever and you will respond. But also you're not allowing your team to have the autonomy to get on with their work and do their tasks and have the ability to make decisions, which can sometimes lead to a more reactionary leadership style because your team know you're always there and you always respond and you always make those decisions, which in turn lowers everyone's productivity. The other thing to think about by being always on is the burnout you're going to go through. So if you're always on and you have certain working hours, but actually you respond out of hours and you respond at weekends, you're going to burn out quicker because you're always in that focus mode of work, or you're always thinking about other tasks for other people and the effects of it. And when do you have time for yourself? When do you have time for your personal life? Because we all have personal lives. And the same being said, if you're always on for your team and your clients, again, think of that burnout that you're going to go through because you're just there responding and firefighting to everyone. Number 2, leading without being everywhere. So as I mentioned, there is a whole episode that I covered off on delegating tasks. But one thing I will highlight is if you feel like you can't delegate tasks, or that the reason for always being on is because you have a new team, or you're onboarding new people, or maybe you don't feel like your team are ready for you to take a breather, take a few hours out, then create yourself what's called an SOP, so standard operating procedure. And this can be from as small as how do we create social content, to FAQs, to if there's ways of working internally of what people need to do in a certain process, create that process or document your way of working and allow your team to do that. Allow your team to have the ability to try and then know when is the right time to pull you in for feedback. The same being said, you can use project management tools to actually then have your set tasks for your team members and even for yourself, and setting those deadlines of when the deadline is that you need to check in. By having project management tools as well, you have the ability to log in and have a look at how work is going, what's in progress, what's blocked, what needs to be done, what's waiting for sign off. Which again, talking about deadlines or when someone may need your approval, think about those buffer times. So what deadline do you want to set your team that then allows you to have some time to take a step back, review their work or give them feedback and not be reactionary? Because a lot of times too, when you're always available, if someone sent you something to review, it could depend on your mood, actually, how you respond and react to something. You may have had a really bad previous meeting, and so you're responding and reacting to someone straight away, giving feedback that could be quite harsh and you don't mean it. And if you had slept on it, it wouldn't have come out like that. Another thing is language. So training your team to understand what's urgent, what's important, what needs approval and sign off, or what they can just do by themselves and then check in later. And it's all around that terminology and language. Again, from lived experience, I worked in a job previously where I had a manager who would always send emails with urgent as a subject line and caps locks with the subject line. And so you give that sense of, oh my gosh, I need to do it now. So your team responds with that urgent. They then send you back that urgent. And it just becomes this vicious cycle of urgent. At the end of the day, what is actually urgent? Is a building on fire? Is someone being rushed into A&E? That is urgent. The reality is most of day-to-day business isn't urgent. It might be important for a business and it might be an important task to do, but is it urgent? What could you have done to allow that breathing space for that task to happen? Or how could you have prepared more in advance for that task to be done? Number 3, setting boundaries and protecting your focus. The first thing to say on this is establishing working hours. So obviously in some corporate environments or businesses, there may be dedicated office hours. Okay, fine. But what does that also mean for you? And what does that mean for your team? Is it that typically you work also outside of those hours? Is that something that you want to continue doing and encourage your team working overtime? Is it that during working hours, you want to make certain times of the day available for your team to have catch-ups with you or send work through for approval? You need to think about all of that in terms of working hours for you and for your team. As someone who runs a remote business, this is a lot harder for us because our working hours very much depend on who is that person and who is their working hours. So we have ways of dealing with this. So we use Slack as our main communication tool, and I make sure that everyone that's onboarded sets their notifications depending on their working times. So that means that anything out of their working times, they will not receive a notification for. And the same being said with communication tools, set the boundaries too with your team. Are you only using email for communication? Are you using Slack? Are you using Microsoft Teams? Are you using Google Chat? If you're using multiple devices, and again, then what's your ruling around WhatsApp? If you're sending WhatsApps out of hours, is it urgent and is it necessary? So if you're an Apple user, you probably will already know about this feature, but you can actually set up different focus modes on your iPhone and on your Mac. And in those focus modes, you can decide what apps you want to allow notifications for and what apps you want to physically show on your phone screen. But by having these focus modes, it's almost like this additional boundary of checking other apps that aren't on your screen during that mode. So if I'm in work mode, I actually don't have social media notifications turned on. And so if I'm going into a social platform, I'm making that purposeful break to go into a platform. So it's my own boundary I'm breaking, but it's just an additional way to stop distractions. Another one is the dreaded email inbox. So protecting your inbox is really important. I would say allocate some time for yourself to go through all the emails that you regularly get and have a look at the newsletters that you get. Firstly, any newsletters that you get that you instantly delete, just unsubscribe. Just that energy focus, you don't need that distraction. Then think about the other categories of your emails. Can you put labels on them? So again, a Gmail user, Gmail's got this really lovely way of putting on different labels, different folders, different subfolders. So you can instantly then look at your inbox and see what needs your attention. What is color coded in certain ways? What is a team email? What is a client email? What is a unpaid bill? But again, it's that less distraction that you constantly have that ping of your emails coming in. The same being said, you may want to set up auto archive, so certain emails may automatically be sorted into a folder, so it's not even in your main inbox when you log into your email. Another way is time blocking. This works for some people and others it doesn't. But if you go through your calendar and actually chunk out time in your calendar to do certain things. So it's likely that if you have a meeting, you will always attend. But if you don't have a meeting, you can get quite distracted. By having time blocks, it's almost like giving yourself that meeting time that you need to do this. And again, if you are a G Suite user in Google Calendar, they actually have different event types and they have one called focus mode. So if someone was looking at your calendar, they can see that that's not just kind of a brainstorm session or that's not a meeting, that's actual focus mode. So if they are going to send you a message, they are breaking that focus mode that you have set in for your time. The other one to think about is actually availability calendars. So again, if you need to be available for your team or for clients, which again, I'm going to refer to Google Calendar being a G Suite user and someone who loves G Suite, you can set up different calendars of availability where you can set rules. So how many of that meeting type will you allow that day? What time of days are you available for certain meeting types? So you may have a link that your team know they can schedule a meeting with you versus a completely different link and different availability for external people versus a completely different link for new business. The other one with time blocking or scheduling meetings is scheduling time for yourself. So make sure that you take that lunch break, make sure that you go to that yoga class, make sure you go and walk the dog. And if you have to, block that time out in your calendar because that's something you want to do. That's something that brings you joy. Don't compromise on that because that will impact your mental health. We all need that time. If you don't have that scheduled in, yes, someone could book a meeting. If you don't have it blocked off and you haven't made yourself unavailable, again, you need to protect all of this for your own availability and your own health so you're not burning out. As a wrap up, with all of these tips and tricks, obviously it's all very industry dependent and job dependent. So if you work in a hospitality environment, it's unlikely that you can do calendar time blocking if you need to be available because you're a chef. But just remember, no matter what job you're doing, you need to make sure that you're making time for yourself. And as a leader, a manager, a director, a business owner, you do not need to be always available and always on for your team. Because at the end of the day, you're going to burn out yourself because you're available for everyone else. Boundaries don't limit your leadership. Boundaries amplify your strategic thinking, your better decision making. So don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of setting boundaries. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Engage and Thrive with your host, Taelon, and see you next week.